let's go live now. All right, welcome back. We are INFR3335U, Social and Multiplayer Game Design in the fall 2021 semester at Ontario Tech University. It's week 11, part 2 of our broadcast. We've been talking about educational mobile games, but now we're going to get into this other part, which is all around the Unity timeline and how we can use create a user interface for mobile that is animated. How do we can do that? And how does this work best for us? Let's talk about it a little bit. So I'm going to bring up Unity. Again, I'm using Unity's hub, and I'm using 2021 119 F1, just like last time. Last time we got together, we had an example project that we were using, right, as an example. And I'm going to bring up that same example from last week, week 10. I'm going to use that same project from last week. And if you want to follow me here, you can do it by downloading it from GitHub. So if you go to Ontario Tech University, so github.com/Ontario Tech University, you'll see a couple things. There is a project from week 10. There it is. And you can download this project. That's the one I'm going to continue with today. All right. And we'll wait till this finishes loading. And hopefully it won't make me spark out too much. Okay, cool. So I will take this link here, and this is the link that I want you guys to go with. I'll just take that and copy it into the chat. And I'll also copy it into the link on the chat on YouTube if you're interested. There it is. All right, so cool. I've got this project. It's pulled up, and last week what we talked about was how to make a user interface that was that could detect platform. And what it would do is it would turn off if it was built for WebGL or for Windows, but it would turn on, and it'd be useful for us if we made it for mobile. Okay. So what about if I wanted to make a some kind of user interface for a menu or something else like that? What would I do? So in scenes, I have a main scene. I'm just going to add another scene here for my demo. So again, I'm just going to go to scene, and we'll call this the start scene. And I'm just going to double click on there. So we're going to start a fresh scene. I'm just going to put this away for now, just so that it makes it easier for me to build. Instead of my simulator, I'm going to use game, and I've set up my display, or instead of free aspect, I'm going to go with a landscape of 3040 by 1440 for planning purposes only. So it kind of matches the resolution of my simulator, right? And I think this is a good way of doing it. Why? It also changed my main camera for a bit as well. So if I go to my scene, you can see now that if I click on my main camera, that I'm seeing it right here. Okay, there's my main camera. I want to add a canvas really quickly. So again, I'm going to go to UI, and I'm going to go to canvas. I'm going to add my canvas in there. And there's a couple of ways of doing this. The canvas itself will be extrapolated from the main scene. It'll be abstracted away. And in most cases in a 3D game, this is acceptable. But when it comes to a menu, sometimes what we want to do is instead of doing it this way is go to canvas, right, and choose, instead of screen space overlay, choose something like screen space camera for menus, right? Grab your main camera and drag and drop it into the render camera area, right? And one thing we have to be cognizant of when we kind of do this is we want to change the scale factor or the UI scale mode. Instead of constant pixel size, we want to scale with screen width, and we want to keep our reference resolution the same as the reference resolution we're using here, which is 3040 by 1440, right? So something like on the x-axis, 3040, and on the y-axis, 1440. And then we change the resolution to match both width and height. That's the first thing we want to do. So whenever we add UI elements, they're going to scale with our screen. That's something that we kind of captured last time as well. That's step one. So canvas scaler, a canvas. Main camera is canvas using screen space camera instead of screen space overlay. All right, great. This is awesome. And what I want to do in the background is I want to have some kind of menu items. And instead of me making my own materials, I'm going to download something, of course. There is a package we can download. So I'm going to go to Package Manager. And I'm going to go to My Assets, and there is a free UI pack, right, that we can download. Now, a lot of times it's for a fantasy UI pack, but it doesn't matter, right? So if we look at the Fantasy Wooden UI free, this is the one I'm going to use. And let's go to the asset store for this one. So you can see it in the asset store. It's this link right here. So you can grab this UI pack if you want to follow along. There it is. That's the asset store. I'll also put that in the YouTube link as well. If you're following along, you can grab that asset. It's a free asset that you can use. And I want to import it. Okay, so I'm importing it. And there's the asset. I'm going to click import. There we go. It's done. Pretty quick. And I have in my assets now Joystick Pack and the Fantasy Wooden UI free. I'm going to make a brand new folder to hold these two things. I'm going to call these external assets. I know people get mad when I do this, but it is what it is. Drag in my Joystick Pack in there and the Fantasy Wooden UI free in there as well, because I just want to see my stuff. I don't want to see other people's stuff. I want to put it all in here in the same pack. In the Fantasy Wooden UI pack, in the normal folder, you can see that there's a bunch of things like a UI board, parchment board that kind of comes up. I want to use this parchment board in my UI because that's the kind of game I feel like making right now. And the UI pack. Maybe I'm going to make a fantasy 3D game for mobile, right, as an example. So what I want to do here in the canvas is I want to add a image. I want to start with an image. I'm going to call this the panel, right, for the image. There's the panel. And I'm going to drag and drop that UI pack, which is my includes a large parchment, right into the source image, right, for that panel. There it is. Notice it's very, very small. Why? It's not set up properly. Let's set it to set native size, right? So that's set native size. So it's got a little bit bigger. And you can see what it would look like in the game example. Pretty small. Let's make it twice as big. All right, there it is. So it's kind of taking most of the screen up. And what I want to do here is I want to say that this is where approximately it's going to start. I'm going to set it up as on a Y of about 80. I think that's probably what works well for me, right? And I want to add a couple of things. I want to add a button and a label, and that's all we're going to do today. Just a button and a label, and I'm going to animate them. Okay, and I'll talk about how to do that. If you don't know how to do it, this might be okay. If you do know how to do it, I'm also going to show you the timeline. There's two ways of doing this thing, right? So again, I'm going to add into the panel. I'm clicked on the panel, and on the panel, I'm going to add a UI text, which is using Text Mesh Pro, all right? Text Mesh Pro is built into Unity 2021 119 F1, but it requires an import of the TMP Essentials. So click on that. You don't need to use the examples and extras. That's not required. All right, cool. So there's my Text Mesh Pro. I have a little asset that's here. I want to put this at a position of 150 on the y-axis, right? And I want to change what it says to something like "Welcome to my game." Welcome to my game. There, you can put whatever message you want in here. I'm going to go in here and change the size of the of my message, so it's much larger. I'm just going to use the sizing tool that's here, right? That's what it does. And I'm going to kind of resize this so it's much larger in the game. And I'm going to use some tools to to center it as well. And I want to use the rect transform and press the Alt key with a rect transform to center it. So make it kind of centered exactly right inside this this kind of area right here, right? I could even, if I really want to, I can put it in a position of 0. It's not going to make a big difference, but one thing it will do is kind of put this in the right position. There we go. So 0, 150 with a width of 374.588 and a height of 50. That is what this is, right? Again, we can make this so it's a round number, like 375. It's, again, pretty much right, okay, in terms of where it's going to be. Awesome. Okay, that's where it is. And again, the centering tools are neat because what you can do is if I want it to the very top, I can kind of center it to the top. If I want to go to the middle, I can click onto it and it'll just snap right to the middle relative to the panel is what it's doing. It's relative to the panel. And then again, I can always pull it up where I want it. I probably want it, like I said, it's something like 150. That's the label. Let's call this the welcome label, where I want this to be, kind of like a hello world application. And let's add in a button now. So again, going back in there, use UI button, Text Mesh Pro, add in this in, we'll call this the start button. And start button is also going to have inside of it another label. This will be the start button label, start button label. There we go. And this will say something like start, right? But the button looks pretty ugly. And what we want to do, we can make a button work in different ways. One of the ways buttons work is it can use color tinting, and that works okay for desktop, but for mobile, and for other things, maybe we want to use a sprite swap. So I want to change this from color tint to sprite swap. Let's do that. And if I do that, we have to change the source image for the UI sprite. I have a list of images here in my fantasy UI. I want to grab the text button big and drag and drop it into my source image. Looks pretty bad right now, and that's okay. I'm going to set native size, so it's really huge. We're going to modify this in a second and make it a little bit smaller. I'm also going to grab the text button big pressed as the highlighted sprite and the text button big pressed as the pressed sprite. And have both of those in there. I'm going to change the start button label's color from this dark color, which has no contrast, to a nicer color like white. So I'm going to click in this vertex color and change it to white so we can actually see the start. And then I'm also going to choose auto size. So it's going to auto size the text so that it fits inside the button area. Obviously the button is way too big. I don't like that. I'm going to go to my start button and change the scale to 0.5. There we go. One thing I need to do though is the start button label is stretched so that it matches the entire button. But I know what happens with this button. When you click onto it, it actually swaps out the image and looks like it's pressed. So example, if I was to run this thing, you'll see the effect that it has. It doesn't quite look right when I kind of hover over or press onto it. See that? It doesn't quite look correct, right? And for this one, instead of doing it that way, instead of like that, I need to modify the text here. So start button label, I'm going to go to the rect transform, press the Alt button, and instead of stretch, I'm just going to center it, the anchor in the middle. So I'm going to do there. And that gives me the ability for me to change the start button label's kind of positioning. So it kind of goes in like this a little bit, and maybe a little bit down as well. So again, I'm just going to bring this in a little bit more, just so it's about there. And what this does is it allow me to, when I'm pressing the start button, again, the start button itself, I'm using a highlighted and press sprite. So if I press play, again, what it allow me to do is click on the button, right? Or highlight the button and change it so that the start stays. Realistically, you'd want to swap out the button and make your own texture for both states, right? Here, I'm just being cheesy and just using one little start button with the text element there instead, right? So I'm cheating. And it looks meh. It looks okay, but nothing great. But that's not the exercise. So I want to go to my start button here, and it's at a height of 112. And I want to move it a little bit further down. So let's put that at 150, or like further down here, like so. So maybe a minus 80. So kind of down here. All right, so there's my UI. That's pretty good. And what I want to do now is I want to animate it. Couple ways to do this. We can use an animator. So again, one thing I should probably do is make it work. Let's make the button work. So under scripts, in my game controller, I have a game controller, and I want to make a game controller happen for my start menu as well. So let's add that in. So I'm going to add a new empty object, which we're going to call the game controller. And I'm going to just reset it. It's good practice to reset all empty objects like this, so it's the center of your screen. And I want to make a little script that we're going to have called menu controller. Let's have that in, menu controller. Here's our menu controller script. And I'm going to drag and drop from the menu controller onto the game controller like so. So just drag and drop this up here. And now I've added the menu controller or attached it to the game controller object, which is just an empty object. Let's double click on the menu controller to add some simple code to make the menu control move to shift from one scene to the next. I know I'm going lightning, but I have to because we're going to run out of time and I don't want to do that. So I'm so sorry. So again, in the menu controller, I don't care about these things. I want to make my own public void method called on button pressed, and we'll say on start button pressed. How about that? Maybe when ReSharper finally lets go. Come on, ReSharper. ReSharper is awesome. It gives you great code hinting, but it also kills me sometimes. On start button press, still going, by the way. Here's start button pressed event. There we go. So this is the event handler. And what I want to use is I want to use using Unity engine dot scene management. And scene management is going to allow me to do something like, hey, scene manager, right? I want to do something like load scene, and I want to start the main scene. So this is kind of how you start the new scene. We've done this before. This is a review. But remember, whatever scene I want to load has to be included in the build settings of my application. So this is good. It's going to load that main scene. Let's go back here, and inside the build settings file, when it finishes doing things, build settings, I need to have both the main scene as well as my start scene in here, and I can arrange my scenes by dragging and dropping them in the order that I want them. Start screen, main scene. Okay. Cool. And what I want to do is when I click, we can try this. When I click the start button, it's going to take me to my game. Let's try this out to make sure that it works. So there it is. Press the start button, and we should take us to our game, right? If the game existed and there was a main scene, then this should work. Okay. But the reason why it doesn't work is because we haven't wired it up. So the start button also has a wiring up section, which has the button section. We can click on this little on-click area here, click the plus button, and drag and drop the game controller on top of that. Choose from no function. We can choose the menu controller and choose the on start button pressed event, which actually wires up the button. So it uses the on button pressed event that we coded inside the menu controller. And if I press play and try it again, now it will work. Again, this is a complete, kind of example of what we've done in the past. It's not something that you haven't seen before. Okay, so that's my little menu, and it works. Questions so far? Anyone for the things that we've done? Didn't take long to put together a real quick mock-up of kind of a start menu, all right? And when it comes to the game that you're building for me for next week, if you don't have a menu in place yet, this is as much as I would even dream about you having. Obviously, you want to add things like audio, and you want to add other things here to make it more interesting. But again, if you add at least something that starts your game, that's good. Again, it has to be contextual, and it should be something that matches. Maybe this parchment thing doesn't make any sense for the kind of game you're making. If you want to make a space menu or whatever, something that's more high-tech, that's fine. Okay, so that's the menu. That's great, but I want to animate it. I want to make it better. We can do better than this, right? And there's a couple ways to do that. One way is to add an animator controller to each element I want to animate. So if I go to my panel, I can do things like, let's make a new asset folder. Let's make a new asset folder called animations, right? And in the animations folder, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add in 3 different controllers, right? So we're going to say that we're going to have a new animator controller, and we're going to call this new animator controller the panel animator controller. Okay? And we're going to attach it to the panel, right? If I drag and drop the animator controller right onto the panel, it actually adds an animator component and attaches the panel animator controller on top of it right away. Okay? Cool. Let's do the same thing for start button really quickly. So again, actually let's just Control D. Control D copies it. We'll just change the name to protect the innocent. And start button animator controller is what we'll call it. A new controller altogether. They're both empty, so it's okay. And the start button, I'm just going to drag and drop the start button animator controller on top of it, which is going to create a little animator for me. Bang. Same thing for the other one, Control D. We can make another object called welcome label animator controller, right? And again, on the welcome label, we'll just drag and drop it onto the add component button. And then again, you can have this little animator that comes on board. So that's all you need to start off with. We need a panel for the animator controller, the animate control for the panel, the start button, and the welcome label. Those are like, if you think about what those are, they're little state machines that allow you to activate any animations that are in there. Awesome. But there's no animations, there's no clips, and we're going to make clips. So there's a couple ways to make the clips. I can have, if I go to my window, I can go to animation, and I can go to where it says animation. Animation is like a timeline. It looks like kind of like the timeline that we have in Blender, except that it is in portions of seconds. All right, that's what this is. So if you notice, if I click onto any one of the things I just added a timeline, a controller for, if I go to the panel, you can see down here it says, to begin animating panel, create an animation clip. Let's do that. So this is the way I'm going to show you first with the animator and then with the timeline and show and talk about the differences. So let's click create. And it's going to ask me, where do I want this animation? Well, I'm going to put it in animations, and I'm going to call this the panel entry animation. Panel entry clip. That's what it is. And I can do the same thing for the other one. So again, let's prepare. So I'm going to do the same things for all of them. So I'm going to call this one the welcome label. Welcome, we'll say entry clip. And finally, for the start button, we'll do the same thing, right? So when I do that, I can have the start button entry clip, right? So all those things. And once I've done that, and the way that I did it, it added these clips in there. And if I double click on any one of these animators, for example, this animator, you can see now that the default animation is the panel entry clip for the panel animator controller, right? One thing to be wary about is that it goes at 1 time speed. So this is the same speed. So whatever the fastest speed is, typically 60 frames per second for your animation, right? But one thing is we can also look and inspect that the actual clip itself, we don't want loop time in this case to be active for any of the clips. So select all the clips by using the control key. If you did that, or one at a time, I think would work best. Just click onto them and uncheck loop time, because you don't want loop time to happen for any of them. Okay, so no clip should have loop time. Cool. Awesome. All right, so now that I've done that and I've got clips and I've got my animation controller, there's no animation for any of them. Let's start off with the panel animation. What I want to do with the panel animation is I want to suggest that we should put this off screen first. I want to make the panel kind of come in from the top. Let's put it way off screen, so like up here somewhere, right? And let's put this at some position like 1500. That's way off screen. And what I want to do with this animation is I want to record a keyframe at the beginning and a keyframe where it ends. Okay, so let's do that. You can add more keyframes if you want to make it so that it simulates an ease in and ease out if you want. A bit of work, but you can do that. Let's click on the record button. Yes, we can do curve mode as well, for sure. If I click the record button, and if I just move it a little bit, it kind of captures the property that I'm adjusting. So in this case, the anchored position Y is the thing that I'm changing, and it acts by adding a keyframe in here, which is at this position, at the 0 mark. I'm going to put in 1500. That's the actual position it's going to be in. Then I'm going to move the scrub head where I want it. So I'm going to say that it's going to take me half a second or something like that. You can see that there is a full second, so half a second of animation frames that I'm going to use to move this thing down, which is pretty quick, okay? What I can do here is, again, I want to take this, once I've moved the scrub head, I can move this now where I want it in place. And I want to kind of target it to be the exact position I want, which is 80. Then I want to stop recording. Then what I can do is I can test the animation out. It's that simple, right? Similar to what we've done in Blender. And if you're, if you've done things with other programs, it's very similar. Yay! The panel animation is done. You can also look at curves if you really want to do that for the panel. So you can see that the curves, you can open this up and you can see what the curve looks like as well, the curves view. But again, I recommend to you that what you're going to see is it's okay to make it run this way, but you're going to see that it's probably better just to look at the dope sheet for now. Bear with me. So that's number one. So I want to make this happen. What I want to do now is do the same thing with my welcome label. My welcome label is going to start off way over here. And let's say we'll move it at a position on the x-axis of, let's say, 1,000. And we'll do the same thing for my start button. My start button will start on the other side, way over here. and we'll move that at a position of like -1000. Okay, something like that. It's got to be away from the camera though. It can't be inside the camera view. So make sure that this part is like way over here. Okay, cool. Awesome. So what I want to do is I want to animate in. So the same thing I did last time. Let's start off with the welcome label because that's the first thing I moved. The welcome label. I want to record a clip. I want to move this a little bit so it records the actual original position, which is 1000, right? And then I want to move it in. Now let's think about this. I'm starting it at this position, and I'm going to say, well, it's going to take a little longer than 30 seconds. Let's move it to like, let's say the 45-second mark. So I'm going to take my little, scrubber, move it to like 45 seconds. And then at the 45-second mark, that's when it's going to come in. It's going to go to 0. And then stop recording. Yay. Awesome. And let's do the same thing with the start button. Start button is over here. Start recording. Move it a little bit, right? Set it back to where it's supposed to be, -1000, right? And then move this thing. And let's make it, instead of like 45, we'll make it the start button comes in the slowest. So we'll make it come in almost at the full second. Okay, so we'll say way over here. And we'll move it to the second, right? The 60 frame mark. And let's just put in, as an example, a keyframe there. So we're going to move this in to where it's supposed to go. This should be at 0. And then stop recording. And there we have it. We have all the different things in place for everything that we want to do. Fantastic. So then, now you can't see everything come in at once. You can see one thing at a time. So this is the kind of the one thing that we're animating every single time in this little area right here in the dope sheet. But if I press play, you're going to see that it actually keeps everything in here. There we go. If I want to adjust the speed, I can adjust the speed per item, and it's okay. So if you watch that again, you can see that it kind of comes in and it animates very quickly. There we go. You can also add in, so let's say if you want to make the panel come in a little slower, then I can go into the panel animation controller, right? And what I can say is that this panel entry clip, instead of it going at a speed of 1, I can make it go at a speed of 0.5. There we go. Yep, that's correct. And if I press play, you can see that that panel is going to come in half as fast. There we go. But this came in pretty slow, or pretty fast too, the welcome label. Let's do the same thing with the welcome label. So the welcome label Animator Controller, let's grab that clip and make it go half as fast, right? And same thing, might as well do the same thing with the start button controller, right? So start button, we can take that clip and make the speed 0.5. It's a lot of adjustments that we're doing, right? And then we press play and we can try it out, and now it's gonna be half as fast, right? And that's a little better. Still think this is a little bit off center, but whatever. And that's not the exercise. So now that we've done that, that's great. But what if I wanted to add other things? Let's say, for example, the panel right now is, I've got a single property I want to animate, but I also want to interpolate. I want to use linear interpolation for color. So it starts off as kind of an opacity of, or an alpha transparency of 0, and it goes to 1, a 0 to 1, something like that. And so we can do that. We can record again, right, for this panel. And then what I can do is I can go into the image area and go into the color and select a 0 for in the alpha transparency area, 0. It adds in the color, and then I can kind of move the same thing over to where I want it to go in the same area where I had my last keyframe, and I can change my color value to a 1, right? So now if we stop recording and if I animate everything, by using the scrubber, you can see that as I move from 0, it goes to 1, and it kind of fades in as well. I can do a fade in effect. So if I press play, you can see that that adds the fade in effect along with everything else. But you can see that the fade in effect, unfortunately, didn't come into play. It came into play way faster than I wanted it to do. So what I can do is instead, I can click the panel, and I can go where I have this keyframe, and I can actually move the keyframe if I want around, or I can add another one. Let's suppose I want to add another keyframe over here, right? So from 0, and let's say, by 25 seconds, like over here, I can go right-click, add a key. I can add keyframes anywhere I want. And this key here, when I kind of move to this place over here, at this position, instead of it being 0, I want it to be something like 0.1 or 0.2, let's say. So it's going to go from 0.2 to 100% in a very short time frame, but when it's down here, not when it's over there. So it's going to stay 0 the entire time, or pretty close to, and then it's going to go 0.2 over here. That's how it's going to go. So let's try that out. So again, in essence, I'm adding additional frames in there, so it's not bad. It looks okay, but we can do better. And this is the animator. You can animate any object just like this if you want to, and it's okay. It's not awesome. There's a lot of work you have to do. And by the way, the timeline doesn't replace the animator in any way. In fact, it can work alongside it. Let's use the timeline instead. Okay. First of all, what is the timeline and what can we do with it? First, let's bring this animator out. Goodbye, animator. And to prepare, I want to remove the clips from the Animator Controller. I don't have to do this, but I'm going to do that for each of the Animator Controllers. So inside the Animator Controller, this finite state machine, let's just remove the clip. I'm not deleting them, I'm just removing them. So if I ever want to put them back, I can just drag and drop it back in. So I'm going back to the Animator Controllers, removing the clip. So there's no animations. But we do have a need for the Animator Controllers. We do need that. Next, I want to go to the Window Package Manager, and I want to look at the timeline inside of the in-project registry. In-project, timeline has already been added in. For 2021 119F1, timeline has been included. I'm just going to update it. And that means to go to here and update. It takes a second. And done. My timeline has been updated to 1.57. So what the heck is the timeline? Well, let's click on View Documentation, which is going to take me to the Unity timeline with the right level. There's the Unity timeline. Here's the link for that. And I'll put that in the chat, as well as on YouTube. And the Unity timeline, what it does is it kind of is a combination of things. I want to combine controlling all the animations in one place. I want to visualize everything. And guys, you know what it reminds me of a lot? Flash, believe it or not. It reminds me of the old Flash system that used to exist out there. So if you're familiar with Flash or the Adobe Animate, right, it's very similar to that in Unity, okay? And what can you use this thing for? You can use it to produce your own cutscenes. You can use it to control items or game objects in your scene without any code, turning them on and off. You can add it to modify things like music. If you want to crossfade from one music track to another at a certain place in your scene, you can do that. You can use it to crossfade from one camera to another with Cinemachine. There's a lot of things you can do with timeline, and it's pretty awesome. So the timeline window is pretty cool. And one thing what we want to do is we want to create a timeline asset. Let me show you how this works. So cool, we've got timeline. What I want to do first of all, anytime we want to use the timeline, is I want to create a new empty object called timeline. There we go, timeline. I want to reset it. Okay, cool, so it's reset. And I want to create a timeline component. For that, I want to go to Window, and I want to go to Sequencing, Timeline. And I want to pull this timeline down below the scene, just like I had with my animation. Okay, there we go. Bring this window up a little bigger. There we go. And what I want to do is I want to click on the timeline game object. Notice down here it says create. Okay, let's make a new folder. So I'll make a new folder called sequencing or sequences, just like animations. Make sure you're clicked onto it and inside of it like this. And then if I click on the timeline and click create, it's going to make my new timeline go into the sequences folder, right? And what I want to call this, I can have many timelines, and I want to have this is the start menu timeline, which is a new playable. The start menu timeline is a component that gets added, or a script that gets added to a playable director. That's what it is. Think about this as a scriptable object, right? It gets added to the playable director. And what it allows us to do is bind different tracks together in one place. Sometimes what I want to do is I want to organize my tracks. I can make different tracks. One of them I want to make a track group. Let's call this the menu animation track group. You don't have to do this, but I like organizing myself. So here's my menu animation tracks. And what I can do here is I can add in an animation track. So here's my animation track. I can target which animation track I want to use by dragging and dropping from anything that has an animator onto the animation track. For example, I can just drag and drop the panel into there. Awesome. So there's my panel. And let's do the other ones too. Let's add other animation tracks. So I'm going to add another animation track for the welcome label, and yet another one for the start button. Pretty cool. So I'm all in here. Now, instead of using clips, I'm going to record right here inside of my timeline. So for the panel animation, I want to click on the panel. I want to first click record here, and then click on the panel that I want to modify, right? Notice when I start moving it again, just like before, I can see that the panel has a keyframe. Make sure that the keyframe is where you want it, up here, so that's 1500, right? Now this is in frames, not in seconds. So I want to say that the panel, just like before, I'm going to zoom in here by scrolling in with my mouse button, middle mouse button. I want to say that that is the first keyframe, and I want to kind of move the scrubber to whatever keyframe I want. Let's say I want it to go to, again, 30. I thought 30 was pretty fast. Let's move it so it takes a full second to come in, okay, the menu. And then I want to move the menu where it's supposed to go. So again, just like we did before, same process, right down to 80. And you can see that it's moved here. And then press stop recording. Cool. So now I can scrub it in, and I can see the same thing as we saw last time. It's like I'm redoing things. But the beautiful thing is I can do the same thing for the welcome label. So again, click on the welcome label, and you start off at 1000 and move it back in by changing it. So I want to say that the welcome label takes a little longer to come in. So when it comes down, it's going to come in around something like 70 or 80. Let's say I get 80 frames, right? At the 80th frame, that's when it's going to come in to the middle. It's going to go to 0, right? And then stop recording. And then do the same thing with the start button. So start button, let's go back to the timeline, start recording the start button, click on the start button, and then start it moving. Record this initial position as -1000. And then notice I'm starting it like way over here. So it starts animating here. I can start anywhere I want, and I can move it so that it's going to start something, the button is going to come in a little bit later, something like 110. So this small frame, if I made a mistake like this, no problem. I can just move the keyframe. Again, who cares? And let's just move it in. So there's the button moving it in, and I can see that this is at 0, and then stop recording. Awesome. You can see the effect of this immediately, right? So it goes boom, 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 right? You can see how it is. Now you see everything at once. You can preview everything without actually pressing play, which is way more powerful. That's number one. Two, just like you could do with the animator, I can look at this in terms of curves. So I can say, well, this is my time and position curve. This is our motion graph. And just like before, you have a motion graph for each one of these things. You can see, you can look at all the motion graphs for each one of them. Look, and this is a beautiful thing, guys, right? Because I can take a look and see how this is all going to affect everything. So I can modify it right here. I can say, well, sure, it takes me 60 frames for this, but it's a pretty, thing. I want to make a little bit of a bounce. Let's just double click anywhere in the curve here, and then just add this in so it bounces below where I want it to go, and then back up to where it's supposed to go. And if I animate it, it does exactly that. It does kind of a bit of a bounce. Boom, boom. Right? You can change these. These are Bezier curves, and you should have learned this in animation algorithms. You can change these Bezier curves to make them look like whatever you like. Okay, pretty cool. So that's something that you can do. Same thing with the welcome label. If you want the welcome label to go beyond where it's supposed to go and come back, you can do the same thing. Just double click anywhere you want. You can play with these values. You can make it go beyond where you want it to go, and then you can change the Bezier curve to make it as sharp or as narrow as you want, right? Something like that. And then it'll come in and out. So the way it looks is it'll look like this. Boom. So it'll kind of move out and in like a bounce. And ease in and out, but more of a bounce. Ease in, ease out, and then back to ease in again. And this one is wrong. I started it in the wrong place. I want to move it after the welcome label, but not so extreme. Let's move this point back, So kind of way over here, right? And I wanted to move over here, but I wanted to move more like a bounce, like this one. So I double click up here, and I want to kind of go beyond where it's supposed to go and go back. All right, so I can modify these curves in real time. And let's take a look and see what that full thing looks like. So it kind of comes to here, it goes in, and goes out. Now I can run it, and you can see I have full control over this whole thing all at once. Again, very Flash-like, right? And it's better, right? And this is better because it's exactly what we want. We can see everything at once. I don't need clips, as an example at all. It animates everything and it keeps everything inside of our timeline component. That's what it does. And it allows us to track things with curves as opposed to just straight on with frames. You can certainly add more keyframes if you want. That's also something you can do with the animator. Again, not replacing the animator, but actually adding to control. You can see everything in one place. Things that you can do with the timeline. If I click here, you can add in an activation track where you want to turn something on at a certain point in time, right? I can add an audio track where I can play the audio track and blend between one track and another. I can add in a custom playable if I want to tween. Like I know, Aim, you talked about tweening. You can actually do your own tweening and move things around in the scene. If you wanted to create your own cutscene, you can do this with the timeline. Think about this as controlling anything you want in the scene. Again, I'm not going to go through that because that's not the scope of what we're doing today. One thing I want to do that we didn't have here is I cannot change the image. That's okay. I want to do the exact same thing. So I go back to this, go back to the beginning, record, click on the panel, go back to the image, change the alpha transparency to 0. Now I get a color for the alpha transparency. I can go back to this point right here where it kind of bounces in. And that's where I want to start changing my alpha transparency to a 0.2, right? Something like that. And then go all the way to full alpha transparency or full opaqueness with that at 1. So that's what that will look like. You can change the curve here as well for your color curve, right? Let's stop recording. And you can see that now it kind of bounces in and it becomes fully opaque just at the end. Let's see how that looks. That's the final effect that I want. Right? And pretty cool. You can play with this value. You can make it look more interesting. You can add sound here. You can time things so that they don't have to start at the beginning, just like you can with the other clips as well. But there's just so much more control. I find that this is a lot easier to manipulate than using different kind of disparate clips that have different animation controllers. I mean, I need different animation controllers, so I have an animation controller so it matches the requirements of my animation track, but I can just do all the animations right here. That's my demo for today, how to animate with both the Animator Controller and the timeline for user interface to make your user interface items look nicer. And how does it build? The exact same way. If I go to build settings, you can see that I'm on Android. Let's pull up LD Player, which is right here. And if I want to build it, just like we did last week, we just can build and run. All right, so let's go back and build and run. Build and run. We're targeting, we'll make this week 10 again. So we will overwrite so that we can do an update as opposed to a brand new one. And hopefully this won't spark out as bad as it did. Jonathan says, animation controllers are best when having more than one animation you need to transition between. Absolutely. And if you're doing something like a character animation or something like that, and you're moving from one animation state to the other, animation controller all the way. But if you're doing something like this, where I want to control something with 0 code, sorry, I know I'm sparking out there, 0 code or no code, timeline is the way to go, right? So this is some really good stuff. Again, it's not the silver bullet, but this is pretty cool. And if you have an exit animation, again, absolutely. Something like that. A pause button. Yeah. No, it doesn't. You can activate the timeline programmatically as well. So again, it's just another tool in your toolbox. Hopefully that might get you guys thinking about different ways of kind of animating UI to make it more interesting for your games. A timeline can be used for a bunch of stuff. Timeline can be used for a UI. Timeline can be used for Cinemachine to change the cameras. You can create different virtual cameras to look at your scene. You can use timeline for a bunch of stuff. Okay, we're just going to wait for this to compile, and when we're done, we can test it out and see if it works. Hey, I'm totally fine with that. You can do any way you like. I'm proposing two different ways of doing it. Yes, they can. Yeah, absolutely. Timeline can also affect children though, right? Because remember, like I moved everything and they all move together, but I'm animating those other pieces separately if I want to, right? And you can also have the timeline activate clips, your animation clips, inside of the of your Animator controller. So let's say, for example, I wanted to animate an idle clip. I can activate the idle clip through the timeline. Okay, so now it looks like it played. Let's take a look. Here's my menu. Okay, let's just start it again. So we'll have this thing work. I'll, kind of start it off again. And you can see that it kind of works just in mobile, just the same as you'd expect it to work right here, right? So we can see that that works just the same, right? Okay, pretty simple. And that is an example of, or a demo for how it would work with a mobile device. All right, that's it for me, guys. I'm going to stop recording. Do you have any questions before we go? Only Jonathan was kind of interacting there. He was saying, yeah, he likes the Animator better. I like the Animator a lot too. There's a lot of great uses for it, but I like to combine them. Sometimes Timeline can solve a problem. The Animator take a lot of code or modification for the Animator to make it work. Yeah, timelines are awesome, Fardeen. They're pretty great. Jonathan says, I know coders. I know question. I brained. Brain dead. Cool. I like it. All right, that's it for me, guys. I'm going to stop recording on YouTube, and then I'll take any other questions, but that's it for today. All right, great. Last thing for the people that are here, please remember